Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode in the Web3 Odyssey. I'm David Lafmish. I'm a co-founder of the Odyssey Network, and I'm here with my co-founder, Yehonatan Cohen-Scally. And also, we're very happy to host a special guest, David Nogueira. David is the founding managing partner and the CTO at Lightshift Capital. Lightshift Capital is a engineering-first fund, Web3 fund. They're an early supporter of the Odyssey ecosystem and also a core contributor to the Odyssey network. David, really happy to have you with us. If you want to maybe introduce yourself, just briefly, yourself and Lightshift.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. I think you said the most important thing, which is that Lightshift is an engineering-first fund. So I'm one of the two partners, and I lead the engineering effort in the fund. To us, it's very important that we invest in companies that are opportunities for also to build alongside the founders and the core teams in Web3 in general. So very, very happy to be here and excited about Odyssey for sure.
Perfect. Thank you, David. So I'm really happy to have this conversation with you today about wallet contracts, which are a really important piece in the Odyssey network and how the Odyssey network implements the concept of dWallets. In the previous episodes, we talked about access control, dWallets, and the Odyssey network. But now, as we're going to talk about wallet contracts, Yehonatan, maybe you can kick us off with a quick refresher about dWallets and what they are.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think the dWallet is the key concept that we introduce in order to help us reimagine this concept of crypto wallets. And I think the most important thing about a dWallet is that you can trustlessly sign messages as a user of the dWallet. And these messages are then verifiable against your public key. And I think what is new about a dWallet versus a normal crypto wallet is that you have an access control scheme that is stateful, that determines completely what you can do with the dWallet. So any message that you want to sign using this dWallet, this access control scheme, which is true and complete, the logic of that access control must approve that message. And because traditional blockchains have their account addresses derived from the public key used for authentication, then every dWallet has an account address on any other blockchain. And then the users of the dWallet can know what's their account addresses on other blockchains. They can generate messages, transactions, using that address for that address, and then they can sign those transactions using the sign-in mechanism of the dWallet. I think that's basically the whole thing. And the beauty about it is that everything is completely trustless. So everything is decentralized and you don't need to trust anything.
Great. And yeah, dWallets are a really exciting new primitive in the blockchain space that Odyssey has introduced. And I believe is a primitive that will help us connect Web3 to the real world and to real world use cases. Now, there could be many different ways to implement dWallets. So maybe, Yehonatan, you can give us some context on how we're implementing dWallets on the Odyssey network and how wallet contracts work into that implementation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we call the Odyssey network the network of dWallets because a dWallet is a primitive on our blockchain. It's the native primitive of our blockchain. And basically what it means is that the only accounts in the Odyssey networks are dWallets. So as you use dWallets as an account for other blockchains, you also use it as an account on our blockchain. And the dWallets are paired with what we call a wallet contract, which is a special type of smart contract that is used to govern all of the decisions that the dWallet is going to do. And every access that a user of the dWallet wants to do with the dWallet goes through the wallet contract before it happens and approved by the network. And the wallet contract needs to approve it. And the way we implement it is that we have every user transaction that goes through the blockchain is to be approved from the wallet contract first. So he sees that the wallet contract sees the transaction, and it approves or disapproves the transaction based on its logic, right? And you can think of it as kind of, we replace the normal authentication method of blockchain, which is usually based only on verification of digital signatures, and now we are abstracting that into something, into a smart contract that we call a wallet contract. And then the wallet contract now is responsible for authentication of that specific account that it's paired to.
Okay, great. I think that's a great high-level overview. So before we dive a bit deeper into how wallet contracts work and how we can use them, maybe we can try and compare them to smart contracts, which is what most developers know and are familiar with. And David, you work with many blockchain developers. Today, they can write pretty much any logic they want into smart contracts. So maybe you can explain, why would a developer be interested in, or why would they need a wallet contract?
Sure. Well, I think saying that developers can write pretty much anything on any smart contract, I think it's a bit of a stretch. I think there are some limitations in depending on protocols and networks specifically. In some of the languages, in particular, those that are kind of quickly becoming a little bit legacy, are quite challenging in terms of the sort of logic that you can go and use. So I would add that caveat. But I think the most interesting thing about wallet contracts specifically is that they are the perfect abstraction that is needed for Web3 to become accessible in an agnostic way. So what I mean by that is a dWallet itself, as Yehonatan was very clearly explaining, is agnostic in terms of which transactions are actually controlled by this wallet specifically, which means that from the developer's standpoint, now they're not thinking just, I can implement logic in this specific network within this specific protocol rules, but actually I can define logic that controls the way that specific assets are spent or transacted, irrespectively of where this is happening, right? And this is the power of a wallet contract. It allows you to think in a holistic way about the industry, where you're not, sticking to a single network. So the wallet contract itself is, of course, what enables this new primitive that we're creating, that is changing a lot bit how we're thinking about custody. But also it's kind of the expansion. It's removing that limitation that exists in current wallets, right? So, and I have to add, which I think is one of the main drivers for developers in this instance, which is you're doing all of this in a way where you can trust the security. Because a lot of times this is, once you start getting deep into what you can do in Web3, somehow privacy and security are kind of foregone. And that can happen in many ways, right? One of the more obvious ways is, okay, now everybody seems to be okay with trusting, your keys with centralized entities. I mean, given recent events, maybe, this will slowly change, but thinking that you can have the same level of flexibility and the same level of logic and programmability that you have in such an interface that you're used to within a centralized exchange, let's say, transported into blockchain code, which is translated into a wallet contract. I think this is the most attractive thing for a developer, because it kind of opens a myriad of opportunities for development. I don't know if that answers your question as directly as you expected, but I think it's an important fact to point out.
I think first of all, that's a great answer. I would also maybe be interested in how you view the difference between, let's say, existing smart contracts who provide some sort of value in the same area. So, when people think about access control in smart contracts, they would probably think about some sort of multi-sig smart contract or things of the sort. So I would maybe like to get your input about that too.
Yeah, if we're talking about things that happen on chain specifically, the immediate thing I think about is the mechanism that allows for signing these transactions on the Odyssey network, just implementing natively MPC, where shares are, the user who initiates a transaction only has one share, and is dependent on the actual network to be able to make the transaction. That immediately is a very big difference between anything that's implemented on a smart contract, even in a context of multi-sig, because you're putting all the onus of security on these keys themselves, right? In the context of a smart contract. Here, the whole process starts with a distributed key generation ceremony, or whatever correct term, and they're all separate. Yes, there are implementations of MPC in current use for custody, but these are still centralized solutions themselves, right? Or at least half or hybrid solutions. So comparing to something like even Gnosis Safe, or these are very, very interesting solutions, but they're quite limiting. One, they have a lot more security risks, and for sure, Yehonatan can talk a lot about those a lot better than I can. But at the same time, they're limited to the protocols that they're covering, right? So if you think about it, you can't just have any asset being custodied in something like a Gnosis Safe, because it makes a lot more sense to have this abstraction layer, and depending on a wallet contract that is not limited to a specific protocol. So from a security standpoint and from a practicality standpoint, I think it's unquestionable that these are, this new primitive is opening, a lot more interesting doors, and it's a lot more flexible. Same thing, different words.
So to add to David's words, I think that another big difference between current multi-sig solutions and wallet contracts on the Odyssey network is that dWallets are actually bounded to a user public or private key. And from the blockchain's perspective, so if we use dWallets to sign messages for Ethereum or for Bitcoin or for whatever other blockchain, then that blockchain doesn't know that transaction originated from a dWallet, and it doesn't care. And that's the beauty, because for that blockchain, it's just another EOA. It's just another end user that is using a normal account. And everything that is up to the access control is completely abstracted away by the wallet contracts. And so that you could do 100% of the capabilities that normal accounts have on current networks. And you don't need any special tweaks to work with specific protocols. And we saw that was an issue for multi-sig protocols. We saw that even for multi-sig protocols that were, of course, for that same blockchain, they were having problems in supporting different type of transactions and smart contract calls and so on. But when you think about supporting different blockchains with the same logic, then it even is much more important, that quality.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, guys. That's really interesting. So I think now we've established a bit of what are wallet contracts and why would we need them. Let's talk about maybe some ways that developers could use wallet contracts. What use cases for dWallets do you find exciting, and how would those use cases translate into a wallet contract? Let's go into some concrete examples.
I think, yeah. So I think first of all, just a kind of like disclaimer, because one of the most exciting things about working with Odsy is that we're building something that allows builders to build things that are much more interesting than what we can come up with, right? So, and that's the kind of thing that we like working on. I personally love working on. But it's also part of how Lightshift approaches the industry, because we think that a lot of these primitives are still need to be created, and this is for sure one of the most important ones. So, whatever I say next might be the least interesting idea that we will see in the network, and I'll be happy if that's the case, right? For us, it's very obvious. For something like institutional custody, current solutions, they're some of them are let's say satisfactory, but they are limiting for sure. So imagine even something like a Fireblocks, right, which leverages MPC heavily to create a hybrid solution of custody, meaning say us as a fund, for example, we want to custody assets and we control one of the shares that controls the signatures that are used for transactions, ultimately of our assets. But to work with Fireblocks, I actually need to depend on a black box code base, right? Because it's IP, it's protected for of course commercial reasons, to a degree also security reasons, and I need to depend on this third party, right? Because they have to own at least one of the shares, and I didn't select them, right? I think Fireblocks is a great product, and again, it's crucial for the industry currently. But one of the big disadvantages is that I'm forced to work with this one particular partner. So for a developer to come in and leverage the Odyssey SDK and the Wallet SDK to be able to build something that is as powerful in terms of functionality as Fireblocks, so allowing for custody in a very secure way and leveraging MPC and distributing these shares. But now I'm actually in control of who can be those parties that have these shares, right? And just building on top of the Odyssey infrastructure to allow for a flexible and very complete environment where you can implement things such as access control, and be very granular about how, for example, assets are spent, right? Maybe a fund wants to own an asset, but to be able to say stake that asset, for example, which is eventually one or multiple transactions, you can actually implement something like that on a wallet contract, right? That level of granularity of control. So not just custody, let's say dumb custody, quote unquote, but also smart custody. And something like that is very, very interesting for an institution like ours, but it will be very, very, very interesting for all these players that are waiting on the sidelines to join Web3 because of some of these limitations that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. And I think that, of course, when you think about taking custody and decentralizing it so that no centralized authority or server holds any share, and all the shares are distributed completely in a decentralized way across our validators or in our networks, and of course to the user. And that's a really important thing. And I think that when you think about also the product kind of view from the user, not just the security view, then you think about the ability to, as you say, not be tied up to any specific custodian and be able to switch between custodians, as simple as changing your wallet contract, because that's exactly what it means. Then I think that's a really important issue. And I think another thing that I would like to add on that note is that wallet contracts can even do more than what was done up until today. You would have access, we'll talk about it later, to a much more granular level of data when you as a wallet contract make a decision about whether to approve a transaction or not. And that's amazing. And I want to touch on a different thing. I think in light of the recent events, as you said before, David, there's a real problem today with crypto. I think that the crypto industry has evolved too fast, and it grew into an economical value that is enormous, and the tech try to keep up and regulation try to keep up, but they cannot keep up with the network effect that is driving crypto today. And I think that because of that, when you have so much power as FTX did, then you have this possibility to make wrong choices. And when you have the possibility to make wrong choices, then sometimes you do. And I think that's part of the reason that blockchain technology and crypto has been thought of initially to solve these kind of problems. And somehow a lot of crypto users have decided that although crypto's vision is about trustlessness, about decentralization, it's okay to trust the most fundamental element that you keep as a user, your key, with centralized solutions. And I don't blame them, because the user experience and ease of everything about centralized exchanges were so much better than anything that was offered up until now in a completely trustless way. And it makes sense that you would use that you would use a better solution with better UX that is much faster, that is much easier to use, that you can actually on-ramp and off-ramp quickly into fiat. But then something hits and something falls, and then another centralized exchange falls, and suddenly I think that your trust begins to break. And maybe that concept of not your keys, not your coin, kind of makes sense again. But why would people need to let go of all the benefits of centralized exchanges, of the user experience or speed? Why would they need to let go of those benefits in order to still know that their funds are there? They're not in some shady algo trading fund, right? How would they know that without losing those advantages? And I think we thought about it a lot, and what we came up with is one of my favorite use cases for dWallets and the Odyssey network, and that we call bring your own wallet, BYOW. And with BYOW, if you bring your own wallet, you can actually develop a centralized solution like FTX, but unlike FTX, the coins stay in your dWallet, because what you do is that you simply log into FTX and give them access to your dWallet, only the type of access that would guarantee that they can withdraw just the amount that you spent on their platform and nothing else. And the thing is, you don't need to send them the money, transfer the money to them and have it stay there. No, your money stays in your dWallet until all the transactions that you made have finalized into a withdrawal that FTX or any other centralized exchange that would be either integrating dWallets or be developed to be working with the bring your own dWallet model, until they can prove to the smart contract, the wallet contract, that you have made this transaction and a withdrawal can be made. And that's actually pretty simple to build. It's not very complicated to build. And the beauty is that once you do that, then you can still have the speed of centralized exchanges, because the centralized exchange behind the scene can still know that it has access to this amount that you didn't transfer to it, but you put on hold for it, that you gave access for it. So it can abstract it away in their system and then make all of the transactions and exchanges between different currencies and different blockchains and everything that you are used to. But your coins are there, and they will stay there. And they will stay there until they can withdraw it, because you have made a sequence of transactions that allows them to withdraw it. And that's it. And I think this is a real game changer in this industry. And you know that in crypto, there is a lot of like zero and ones. There's a lot of like radical opinions, like everything should be decentralized or everything should be centralized, or there's a lot of zero and ones about everything. And I think that for us, we try to accommodate everything because we think that there is a space for trustless cross-chain decentralized exchanges on top of Odyssey. But there's also a space for centralized exchanges that are still trustless on top of Odyssey. And users can choose whatever that accommodates their specific needs and whatever they can live with as a security advantages and disadvantages for every different product, right? But we try to imagine the entire ecosystem and how it can benefit from dWallets. And I think that even the centralized parts can benefit from dWallets, and then users can have the security and peace of mind of decentralization and the user experience and speed of centralization together.
Yeah, that's a good. Those were good words.
Thank you.
So I think that's really interesting to understand how exactly a wallet contract bridges that gap, right? So if I'm riffing off your last example, basically the wallet contract will be able to enforce the logic of this is the exchange that I approved, and that would be the only exchange that centralized exchange would be able to perform with my dWallet. But at no point they will actually own my assets, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. That's cool stuff. So I think maybe, unless there are other use cases that you want to us to talk about, I think maybe we can go a bit more into exactly how that works, the inner works of a wallet contract. So basically, a well-written wallet contract should be able to interpret a transaction and to understand whether the dWallet should sign it or not. And it seems like that could be a pretty difficult task. We're talking about different chains and different types of transactions, and on the other hand, also be able to enforce any kind of logic that you can imagine. So maybe, Yehonatan, maybe you can talk a bit about that challenge and how we're helping developers overcome that in the Odyssey network.
Yeah, of course. Well, this is not only a challenge, it's a common need that almost all wallet contract developers on our network will want and be required to implement in order to write their logic. And I think there is no reason for them to do it. So we decided to do it internally. And it's not only about saving them time and allowing them to focus on their business logic, which is already a good enough reason. I think it's also about the security implications of handling parsing code well, because you know that historically parsing code has been one of the most, like really serialization, deserialization, coding, decoding has been one of the best or most, I don't know if it's the best, but most renowned attack vectors in history.
Well, from an attacker perspective, it's the best.
From an attacker perspective, as a previous attacker, I would tell you it's pretty good. But now, I don't know. So it must be done correctly. And of course, if you think about it, different blockchains are written in different languages, and there is no way that we can actually take all of the original encoding and decoding code and just offer it or import it directly. We must write and develop some kind of uniform layer and abstraction that will actually give the developers access to all of those blockchains. And that's our mission, is to do it like as straightforward as possible, as easy to use and generic for the developers, and secure. That's it.
Great. So David, maybe you can share a bit about the wallet contract SDK, which is our way of doing that on the Odyssey network, and also something that you're personally and with Lightshift contributing to on the Odyssey network.
Yeah, so I think kind of building on what Yehonatan was saying, serializing, deserializing, encoding, decoding, not only is one of the most common attack vectors, but it's also usually a pain for developers in many scenarios, right? And the last thing that we want is to have friction for building this network, right? So the way that we're thinking about the wallet SDK is we try to do, I'm afraid of using the word heavy lifting, but I think it's a little bit of that, right? Or at least covering the most fundamental basis for the majority of protocols that are relevant to the space, and offer an SDK that allows the developer to not have to worry about that specific problem. So it's essentially an abstraction, and an abstraction that is in a standardized way, right? So that it doesn't matter which network they're interacting with. It's the way that they're interacting with that network, or the way that they're thinking about the logic, rather, I think is a more adequate way of explaining it, is the same, right? And that's I think paramount for not only making sure that we're kind of creating the best interfacing with building on this network, but also it kind of building on top of what Yehonatan was saying as well. I think it's very important for security reasons, because this is where mistakes would be happening. And I think it's super important to clarify that our building effort is, when I say ours, I mean Lightshift, yours, Odsy Network's building effort, every contributor, is to give the tools for other builders to build, right? And I think the primitive that we absolutely have to follow is security first. And by having these standards in a very, structured, clear way, and we spent a lot of time thinking about this and discussing it. And this is, crucial phase of development specifically because of that. And we love being involved with it because it absolutely forces us to understand in completion what we're actually building here. But at the end of the day, this wallet SDK has to be something that is easy to use, but at the same time, that easiness cannot compromise security. In fact, it should enhance it, right? When a developer interacts with the SDK, they should feel like they're a lot more secure in the way that they're implementing this logic than if they had to do it by themselves, right? This is kind of like the directive of design for what we're building. And then I think I don't want to go back, but I kind of do on some of the things that Yehonatan was saying, because maybe for those that are already familiar with Odsy, the Odsy network and how things are built, and have had the chance to look at the light paper, some of these things are super obvious, but others are not. Like, I think it's maybe difficult for someone who's just learning about Odsy network to abstract all of this logic that we're talking about here. And I just want to say that from the end user's perspective, right, the way that they actually would interact, the way that Odsy network should be implemented, it should be seamless in a way that the user doesn't necessarily need to know they're actually interacting with this network, right? They might be interacting with a product that relies heavily on the Odsy network, but at the end of the day, maybe for them, it might be the same ledger that they're used to, right? And maybe they're approving a transaction and they're seeing something on that ledger that is, for example, one of the actions on that, semi-centralized exchange that we described. And adding to that, I think that the beauty of the Odsy network is that it's for everybody, right? It's, it benefits that end user for sure. Who, for example, someone who likes to play in the DeFi space, and, is almost not knowing he can be interacting or with whatever networks that he likes to play on and invest in. And And the way that they're getting to that network is Odyssey, and they don't know, right? But it's also an opportunity for other players, right? Including institutions, even the most traditional legacy institutions, to integrate with Web3 without having to rely on centralized parties, right? Because if you're a fintech company, let's say that if you're a neobank, right, and you want to develop or integrate with Web3 with one of your products, now rather than having to go to one of the parties that we mentioned before, you can yourself go and, leverage this SDK and integrate, develop something for your own existing products, right? And now we're part of Web3. And from our perspective, we're native to Web3. Okay, now they're part of Web3. And I think this is very, very powerful, right? This is kind of like a potential spark for Web3 to become mainstream. So I know this is very far off and high level what I'm saying now, but actually when we're thinking about these problems, and when we're thinking about things as simple as documentation and, a nice landing page for developers and all that, like I think about these scenarios, because I want those guys to feel comfortable. And, and I'm going to use names now. Like I remember the first time that I looked at Stripe's, documentation and thinking about integrating with Stripe the first time, I'm like, this is going to be the easiest job in the world.
Of course.
Like everything is thought out for me. Like I trust these guys. This is sound code. Like this documentation is amazing. This API is very well designed. Like this problem that I had yesterday doesn't exist anymore as a developer. And the way I think about it is I want our stuff that we're building for Odyssey to be even better than that, where it's super easy to become Web3 native, right?
So that's great. That's a high bar, being better than Stripe in API documentation. But I think that's a really great point. We were talking a lot from the developer, like the wallet contract developer point of view, but I think mentioning that from the end user point of view, this could be seamless and transparent. That's a really strong statement, and I also think that a lot of, and David, that as a very active investor in the Odyssey ecosystem, that a lot of the solutions that are being built on top of Odyssey have exactly that in mind. How do we take the great capabilities that Odyssey offers and abstract them for the end user, so they may not even know that they're interacting directly within a blockchain space or specifically with Odyssey or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's a great input. Great. So I think Yehonatan, maybe you could tell us just a bit about what a developer that us and is super excited about what we just described, and they want to start working on wallet contracts and engaging with them. What exactly do they need to know in order for them to be able to make use of wallet contracts on the Odyssey network?
Yeah, so I think that an important design factor for us was choosing the the smart contract model and programming language that would be the most accessible, the most down to earth and connectable to the real world currently. And I think that's something that was really slowing the blockchain industry in general, that certain blockchains that just decided to invent new programming languages that no one understood or knew how to program, and no existing code base was available for developers. And I think that very fortunately there has been a lot of work towards standardizing a bytecode that would be for these exact purposes, for a pure code that runs in an isolated environment. And that standard that has become a global standard is WebAssembly. and WebAssembly is integrated heavily into all of the browsers. It's even accessible in Lambdas in AWS, and a lot of blockchains currently are using WebAssembly. And I think that this already makes it a very candid choice. But besides that, a lot of programming languages are actually now compilable and have official support into WebAssembly. So of course we know Rust and we know AssemblyScript, but languages like Go and C and stuff like that are just constantly making efforts in order to become more and more compatible with WebAssembly. And I think that already there is a lot of code base that is usable when you write any program that compiles into WebAssembly. But as we grow and this becomes more standardized and more popular, then more and more libraries are adding WebAssembly support directly. And so more and more code is accessible. And I think that's very important for me because we want to make it as accessible for developers and have it as transparent for them. Yeah, what we're building here is magic. What we're building here is hard. What we're building here is advanced cryptography and math. And we need experts, both in engineering and in research, in order to build this. But we don't want that the developers that are going to build on top of us need to understand anything about it, actually. I want it to be completely transparent. And that was, I think, maybe the reason that we invented the Odyssey network in the first place, was because we saw a need for MPC that is decentralized in a lot of different use cases. And we thought it is impossible that every use case that wants to do either custody or an exchange or a bridge or whatever would hire cryptographers and waste all of his effort on cryptography we don't want that. So when we built Odyssey network and when we're thinking about the dWallet interface and the wallet contract SDK, we're thinking, how can we bring good programmers that don't even need to understand Web3 per se or smart contract per se in order to write wallet contracts code? They would need to, of course, learn a lot of concept about blockchain, but in order to write the logic of a wallet contract, all they need to do is write a simple function that would take as input an already parsed transaction and would answer if it approves it or not. And that's the big idea behind the way we design dWallets and the wallet contract SDK. And that's what we have in mind conceptually when working and standardizing this.
That's great. I think that that's a great way to wrap up this conversation. We're currently, as you mentioned, working on our DevNet testnet that will allow anyone to build on top of Odyssey and hopefully easier than Stripe. And we're already working with really special and talented teams of early builders that share the Odyssey vision and are building some really, really interesting things on top of Odyssey. Some of them have already made announcements regarding their funding rounds. And if you'd like to be one of those early teams, feel free to reach out at odyssey.xyz. You can also learn more about what we're building there. I want to thank you, David, for joining us. This was really fun. It's fun working with you in general, but thank you for joining us and talking about wallet contracts. And I think we should get back to building because the world is waiting for Odyssey.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, David, you don't need to remind me every day.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, guys. And we'll see you next time in our next chapter. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.